Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here. Today, you are going to learn 3 actions for effective communication across generations. It's going to be a magnificent webinar that Ryan is kicking off today. I'm your host, Steve Van Cohen, co-founder of Sync Learning Experiences. Today's content is powered by Sync Learning Experiences, where we design professional development training for businesses that's delivered via LMS courses, live workshops, and custom L&D solutions. Unfortunately, many of you can relate to this. Most training is neglected, disliked, and forgotten, but our learning solutions are actually used, enjoyed, and applied by some of today's leading companies such as Salesforce, the Home Depot, John Deere, and more. You can learn more about what we're up to at SyncLX by going to synklx.com. Without further ado, let's introduce the man of the half hour, Mr. Ryan Jenkins. Our speaker today is an internationally recognized keynote speaker and author on the topics of leadership, generational differences, and the future of work. His work has been featured in Forbes, Fast Company, The Wall Street Journal, and CNN Business. He is the co-founder of Sync Learning Experiences and hosts the podcast, The Future of Learning and Development. Feel free to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Ryan lives in Atlanta with his wife, his 3 kids, and his yellow Labrador. Ryan, take it away.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time and attention. Let's start here. Did you know that 75% of managers report that managing multi-generational teams is a challenge? Secondly, 77% of workers identify different work expectations across generations as a challenge. And lastly, 72% of workers identify a lack of comfort with younger employees managing older employees. So these 3 statistics give us some interesting context on how challenging it is working across generations, leading across generations, and for our conversation today, communicating across generations. So here's where we're going to go in the next 30 minutes. I'm going to give you a couple housekeeping items as well. So we're going to talk about communication. What are some of the generational differences? Once we have that firm understanding, I'm going to give you 3 very specific strategies to connect across generations. Then we will recap. I've got a game for us to play, and we'll do some Q&A as well. A couple other things to note. You're going to get copies of today's slides. We'll let you know how to get those at the end. You're also going to get all of our contact information. And as I mentioned, there's a virtual competition that we're going to do at the end. The winner will receive my latest book, which is the Generation Z Guide. So stay tuned all the way to the end at your chance to win that book. All right, we're going to do some live polling as we do every time on these webinars. And here's how you play along. To pull out a device, I would recommend your mobile device and open up your favorite browser. You can also open up a new window on your desktop as well. And you can visit this link that you see here, pollev.com/live poll. And here's how it works. When you arrive at that link, and when I prompt the polling slide, you will see the question or the instruction, and then the potential responses or the area in which you can execute the instruction. Very simple, very seamless, and also a lot of fun. So visit that link, pollev.com/live poll. Again, I'd recommend using your phone to do that. And here's our first poll. Simply is, where are you today? So this is a clickable image. For most of you, you might have to zoom in a little bit to get the right pin. And if you're out of the US, you can just throw one as far off in the direction of where you're located, but we figured most folks would be in the US today. And I'm coming at you from Atlanta, Georgia. Yep, I'm very happy with that pin drop. But of course, we're all virtual these days. Most of us are anyways. And it's always nice to see where folks are coming from. And it gives us some good context. And for me, I don't know, I think it's always a very great reminder how technology can connect us, even though we're spread out throughout the entire country. So it looks like we've got just about every zip code, if not all of zip code or time zone covered here. But keep those devices out and hot because we've got a couple other questions and polling that we're going to do. Here's our next poll, in fact. What do you think goes in the blank? 90% of the time, people think their emails and texts are understood by recipients, but the messages are understood only blank. of the time. And if you're just now joining us, use the link at the top to engage live. If you're watching the pre-recorded version of this sometime in the future, hello from the past. And you obviously won't be able to engage live, but the responses from your peers and the folks that are live should be insightful nonetheless. All right, so most of you think it's 30%, with some of you saying 40%. Now some of you chiming in with 60. Actually, the correct answer here is 50%. They're only understood only 50% of the time. So this is at the crux of our conversation today, is how do we iron out some of these miscommunications? So when it comes to generational dynamics, and as it relates to communication, you'll have a generation that is very comfortable just calling you, and that's what their preference is. Then you have another generation that has no problem sending you an email, and that's their communication preference. Then you have another generation that has no problem at all sending you a text message while they're standing right next to you, right? 6 feet apart, of course. But of course, we've all understood this dynamic, and each generation has a different preference as it relates to communication. In fact, let's look at what those preferences are right now. So here are the 4 major generations in the workforce today. And here's how they connect or view communication. For boomers, it's formal and direct. Gen X, informal, flexible. Millennials, authentic and fast. Gen Z, it's transparent and highly visual. Their view of communication: boomers, face-to-face, phone and email. Gen X, email, text, and Facebook. Millennials, text, chat, email, and Instagram. And for Gen Z, it's Snapchat, TikTok, FaceTime, YouTube, WhatsApp, Twitch, and face-to-face. We can talk more about that digital and non-digital dynamic in the question and answer portion if you'd like to explore further, because it's really interesting with Gen Z. And lastly here, their attitude towards communication. Boomers need background info and details. Gen X want to keep it professional. Millennials, efficient, mobile first. And for Gen Z, it's mobile only, video, and voice command. And when I say voice command, think about using their voice to manipulate smart devices, whether that be Siri or Alexa or any other devices that are within speaking distance. So it's clear here that each generation has a different preference as it relates to communication. So we have to first be aware of what those preferences are if we're going to effectively navigate today's multi-generational marketplace. All right, so let's discuss briefly the communication gap across generations. Let's look at a couple data points. 83% of Gen Z workers prefer to engage with managers in person. Now, this is a data point pre-COVID. I imagine there's some similar dynamics as to one-on-one, face-to-face via video chat, but certainly as we're all comfortable getting back in small gatherings or in the office, I expect this to pick up right where it left off. But here's where the contrast comes in. 82% of managers believe Gen Z employees prefer to communicate via instant message. So Gen Z wants to communicate this way, and then other generations think that they want to communicate a completely different way. So there's a massive communication gap here. Here's another example. 57% of Gen Z want to receive feedback several times a week, yet only 50% of managers provide feedback to Gen Z several times a week. So again, no matter how we slice this and which generation's involved, there's all kinds of opportunities for large communication gaps. And if we want to close those gaps and create more efficiencies in our communication, we got to be aware of all these dynamics and use some of the strategies that I'll share in just a bit. So here's some interesting data points I think you'll find interesting. The percent of emoji users who are more comfortable expressing their emotions through emojis than a phone call. Here's the data points. We're going to go by the 4 major generations in the workforce. So for boomers, it's 53%. For Gen X, it's 61%. For millennials, it's 71%. And for Gen Z, it's a whopping 83%. So even when it comes down to the simplest preference as it relates to using emojis, there's a massive gap as it relates to communication and across generations. So here's what I know to be true about communications. I know communicating across generations is challenging. I know you want to get it right, and the strategies that I'm about to share can help, right? And these aren't silver bullets. Communicating across generations, communicating just in general is always going to be a tension to manage. because there's going to be always new technology, different generations coming in to the workforce. So we've got to constantly be sharpening, coming to the table, and managing that tension. So now let's jump into these strategies. And don't forget, we've got a virtual competition coming up at the end to win a copy of my book. And let's start here. If you received this text message, how would you interpret it? Would you think that was sarcastic, supportive, or neutral? I know I'm not giving you a lot of context here, but that's intentional. But I just imagine if you got this text message and you just saw it out of the corner of your eye on your device, what would your knee-jerk reaction be? Would you think that supportive, sarcastic, or neutral? Again, if you're just now joining us, you can visit the link at the top of the slide to interact live. All right, so a far majority of you say, hey, this text message, the very basic 2-word message, nice job, is supportive. And this is your opinion. This is completely subjective. So however you interpret that is how you interpret that. But let's look at some really interesting research as it relates to that poll. Research shows that when we get a 2-word message, 60% of the time that 2-word message is it interpreted as sarcastic. 60% of the time, 2 words are interpreted as sarcastic. So think about all the times you send an email or you send a text with just 2 words. Oftentimes, the recipient of that communication is going to be misinterpreting those words. And this is really important as you and I are now communicating more digitally than ever before. We have to make sure that the emotional intent, the context of our communication is very, very clear, because we don't have all the other body language and facial gestures and all these other things to really re-emphasize our context in our communications. So if you were to send that text message, you might get this back in response. Someone might say, thanks. And even that word, you don't know how to interpret that. Is that a sarcastic, like, thanks? Or is that a thank you, really supportive and encouraging thanks? So here's what happens. Humans have a tendency to assume the worst when the intent of the communication isn't clear. This is how you and I have survived all these years, because we assume the worst. We assume that there's going to be a bear in that cave. We assume that there's something that's going to eat me in those rustling bushes. If I'm going to assume the worst, I'm going to go in a different direction. And it's been a survival technique. Our brain is still operating that same way even today. So when there's a gap, when all the information isn't available, we will assume the worst. That's why 60% of people interpret those 2-word messages as sarcastic. So how do we clear this up? Well, you can simply just add an emoji. It's very simple, right? If you send nice job with that emoji, now there's no way to misinterpret that, is there? And here's how it breaks down generationally. Only 17% of the emerging generations consider emojis as unprofessional. So if you winced a little bit, if you cringed when I shared or asked you or encouraged you to send that emoji, if you cringed a little bit, there's an entire generation that thinks it's 100% okay to be using more emojis in a professional and in the amongst coworkers, peers, clients, etc. So again, it represents a massive gap. So if you sent that emoji with that smiley face, you might have gotten back something like this. And now at this point, all of the communication is hyper clear at this point, isn't it? And it just took adding 2 emojis. Now here's what's also really fascinating about using emojis. Some recent research indicates that the same part of the human brain that processes human faces processes emojis. So if you want to if you're not able to see someone's face when you're sending an email or sending a text, using an emoji can help reinforce the intended message of your communications. So on the heels of all this information, my friends, here's our first strategy, and it's to simply clarify the emotional intent. Use emojis, or at least if you can't bring yourself to use emojis, be more descriptive to ensure negative biases don't hijack the intended meaning of your digital messages. And this is so important, especially as it relates to communicating across generations, because we tend to interpret things differently. We tend to have different preferences on certain communication channels. So the more descriptive we can be, the more clarifying of the emotional intent behind our messages, the better we are going to be at closing that communication gap across generations. FYI, if you're not sure what emoji to use to communicate a certain emotion, Check out emojipedia.org to find the right emoji. Just a fun FYI, it's kind of a fun tool anyway. If you go in there and type in angry, you can see all the emojis that represent anger. All right, here's our second strategy as it relates to communication across generations, and that is to mirror your communications. So that is respond to communications using the same channel in which it was received. So here's a good example that happened to me recently. A real estate agent called me and left a very vague voicemail. I texted the individual back, and then they called me repeatedly. They took me texting, they interpreted me texting them as interest and called me repeatedly. And now to me, as a millennial, I'm not gonna answer the phone. So to me, in my mind, that real estate agent is completely out of touch. I've blocked them, and I will never refer any business to that individual for that small interaction. Now, what happened here was really interesting, right? Is they should have mirrored their communication, right? Well, first, before this even happened, they should have deferred their communication preference. They should have known, hey, Ryan's of the millennial generation. He's likely not going to pick up his phone. So the real estate agent either should have sent me a text or sent me an email. They didn't do that. So I sent them a text, and if they were a smart individual and if they were hoping to close the communication gap, they would have texted me back, right? That would have been mirroring the communications. So I texted, they should have texted back. And at that point, I would have been much more likely to have engaged in some type of conversation at that point. Instead, I went in a complete different direction, and that relationship is now broken. So hopefully that's a good example to give you a sense of how we need to mirror our communications as it relates to communicating across generations. So it's no longer about how we prefer to communicate as the communicator. It's all about how the communicatee intends or is best suited to receive that information. We really got to put ourselves in the shoes of the other individual. All right, let's do another poll to tee up our final strategy here. And that is, what is your preferred method of communication at work? I'm just kind of curious. We've got all kinds of different folks from across the country, even perhaps some international folks. So what is your preference as it relates to let the record show no one has said phone call. No one has said phone call. Poor phone calls. Looks like most of you say email followed by face-to-face. Most of the time when I ask this question face-to-face, actually it depends on the industry, but I'd say most of the time face-to-face is the winner, which I think is really encouraging that we all still want that to be a method of communication. But look at all these different preferences. And on today, just on this webinar live, we have 6 different preferences on how folks want to communicate. So not only do you have to consider all these 6 different channels in which to communicate, but you now have to think through the 4 different generations that are in the workforce and their preference. So all that to say, it is a very complex environment when it comes to communicating in the 21st century. So here's our final strategy, and that is to set communication expectations. And that's kind of a broad strategy. I'm going to give you some really actionable and meaty things to sink your teeth into here, though. So don't leave others guessing which of the myriad of communication channels to use, right? There were 6 communication preferences just engaged today alone that we saw on the poll. So be proactive about informing others of how they can best connect with you. So here's some examples of how to do just that. Mention you prefer text over a phone call in your email signature or Slack profile or some type of other messaging platform. Or consider mentioning you prefer an email over a voicemail in your voicemail recording. Give folks subtle hints of how they best to communicate with you. They will not always be followed, but at least you're giving yourself and those in which you're in close contact with the best opportunities to succeed when it comes to communications. And then the other thing I'm going to consider or encourage you to do is to consider creating a communication agreement. Let me tell you more about what that is exactly. This is perhaps maybe the most helpful tip I can give you today. So a communication agreement, the what and the why. The what is, the purpose is to create official guidelines that help the rules of a team to communicate with one another. And it helps to set expectations, create team buy-in, establish boundaries to protect crucial work and streamline communication. So when I say communication agreement, I mean an official communication agreement among a team as to how certain communications are supposed to be handled. So let me give you some super specific questions and topics to ask your team with to develop your very own communication agreement. So forgive me in advance. There's a lot of words on this upcoming slide, but I wanted to give you as many as I could and pack them into one slide so you can screenshot this. Of course, you're going to get all these slides, so this will be a resource for you. But here's a sample of some of the questions to gather your team together and ask, because we all have different preferences, as we've seen throughout this time together, as it relates to communications. And so we all need to get on the same page and figure out what's the most efficient use of our time and the most efficient use of our communication technology to be able to best communicate with one another, to best deliver for our customers and our clients, et cetera. So here's some questions to consider. What communication challenges currently exist among the team? That's a really good starting point. An example might be there's too much time-sensitive info that is being sent via email instead of chat, right? Because chat's much more immediate. So if something's time-sensitive, the preferred channel might be to use a chat versus email. Because some people might be batching their time and only check email at scheduled times throughout the day. Another question to ask is, what is the team's most used communication channel? And is that channel the most effective? So the example here might be email is our most used channel, but a reduction in the daily number of emails is ideal. I'm sure we can all relate to that. Some of us, we spend our whole day in inbox, right? And there's just constantly never ending flow of emails, but that's a great question to cover and come to a consensus on. Are there communications that need to be prioritized? Example might be any current or potential customers communications. Those should be prioritized. You know, give yourself or the team permission to prioritize those communications. What are the expectations for response times to email, phone, and text? This is a great question. I think if you tackle this with your team, you'll be surprised at the varying numbers and responses you get. So the example might be email response times expectations are 24 to 48 hours. Some of you may see that 24 to 48 hours and cringe and think it should be less than 3 hours. So again, it's important to get on the same page because this will help to build the communication agreement. What communication channel should be used for emergency only? That's a great one as well. So an example might be a team that we worked with recently and said they use unprompted phone calls are for emergencies only. So if you get a call from a colleague or your boss or leadership team or whatever it might be, that phone call is to be prioritized because everyone knows per the communication agreement, those are high priority communications. So those are example. I would also consider creating a separate agreement internally for your external communications as well. Again, it's so helpful because there's so many different channels, there's so many different generations and preferences that are muddying the waters as it relates to communication. So getting on the same page and creating communication agreement can be extremely helpful. All right, my friends, there were the strategies. Let's jump into our virtual competition for an opportunity to win a book. It's really fun and seamless to play. Before we get there though, quickly, here's how you can work together with Sync Learning Experiences. Again, we have digital courses that fit into your LMS, or if you're a small business, we actually have a whole tech platform that can be used to deliver those courses. We also do custom courses for our clients as well. Workshops, we do virtual trainings, much like you're experiencing now, as well as in-person that look to be picking up here in 2021. So contact us if that's of interest. And then we do a ton of custom L&D work, digitizing training materials, custom explainer videos in certain instances. So whatever your L&D needs might be in these 3 areas, would love to explore further. Simply email me to explore working together. Now, the virtual competition, we're going to be using the same polling function as we have the whole time. And here's how it's going to work. Visit that link. If you haven't been polling with us now, you still have an opportunity to chime in. The goal here is to answer correctly as fast as you can. And then the winner, as I mentioned, will receive a book, Quick note, when we start the competition, you'll be randomly assigned a guest ID, and that's how you'll know where you rank in the leaderboard. And that'll be shown there right below the URL. So here we go, folks. The competition starts now. Here's your first question. 57% of Gen Z want to receive feedback several times a week. Is that true? Is that false? What do you think? And I forgot to mention, you will have 15 seconds to respond, and that timer will be on the screen. You won't see it wherever you're responding to the competition, but just know you have 15 seconds. The faster you answer, the more points you'll get. So the correct answer here is true. Most of you got it. Well done. Here's the peek at the leaderboard. We've got a tie for first. That always happens right out of the gate. Stay sharp. This will narrow quickly. Here's your next question. All right, time is up. Correct answer was assume the worst. 100% of you got it. Well done. I'm sure there's going to be still the tie. Yep, still got a multi-tie for first place. A few more questions. Here's your next one. What's the best emoji? We didn't cover that one. What is the best emoji? That last one is the trumpet, by the way, some kind of, I don't know what type of trumpet that is exactly, but it's completely random. All right, there's no correct answer to that one, of course. That was subjective, just a little bit of fun to throw in there. So whatever you answered was correct. So still have a tie, great. All right, here we go. What percent of workers identify different work expectations across generations as a challenge? Correct answer was 77%. Most of you got it. Well done. Okay, now this is narrowed. Guess 536 has a perfect score. Well done. Still a question or two. So anybody's game is, everyone's super close here. I believe this is our last question. Good luck. Correct answer. All of you got it. Well done. All right, so guess 536 with the perfect score. You are the winner. Here's how you get a copy of the book. If you placed first, you should now see the first icon on your device. Simply screenshot that. You can, if you do that on your device, usually pressing the two buttons on the side will allow you to screenshot. Email me that screenshot to the following address. There's my email address. And be sure to include your physical address so I can ship you the book. And there you have it. All right, we've got a few minutes. We'd love to take some questions. Steve's going to jump in too if he's got something to add. Here's how we're going to do the questions. You simply just text in your questions and you can vote up or down whatever questions you would like Steve and I to ask. And we'll take as many as come in. But there's the recap on everything we've covered today. Those are the 3 strategies that are going to help you to communicate across generations. Number 1, clarify the emotional intent. Number 2, mirror your communications. And number 3 is to set communication expectations. And one of the ways you can set communication expectations is to create a communication agreement.
Hey, Ryan, the leaderboard is still showing, so we can't respond or add a question at this point in time.
Okay, well, let's go old school and either use the Q&A function or the chat box. All right, so either throw your question in the Q&A. Let's use the chat box. Throw any questions in the chat box. And thank you, Christine. That is a French horn. That emoji in that competition was a French horn. Thank you.
So Ryan, I'll ask the first question because you teased us at the beginning of our presentation. You said there's a unique component to the in-person communication preference for Gen Z. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so according to our research, which parallels a lot of other research that's been done in this space, is that over 70% of Gen Z say they want to communicate face-to-face at work. Again, that all this research was pre-COVID, but it's still very jarring because most people think, oh, Gen Z, they're always in their devices, and we assume that they want to text or they just want to be involved in their device in some kind of digital communication. But really, the research is the opposite of that. It's actually no, they want to be face to face. And so what's really interesting here is our research shows that 72% want to communicate face to face. Other research has it high as 75% that Gen Z wants to communicate via face to face. And so don't be misguided by how digital savvy this generation is, because they are screaming out loud. Well, they're not screaming out loud, but they're screaming on the inside for more in-person connection and more in-person communication. So we have to find ways to make sure that we're prioritizing that, especially with Gen Z, because they're craving it at a level that most of us aren't expecting. And so a simple strategy to kind of think about as it relates to this topic is to couple high tech with high touch. So we've got to continuously serve up the technology that this generation is so native with and that they expect, but we also have to couple all that with super high touch as well. So we've got to be savvy on all the communication channels in which they're going to use to communicate with us, but never miss the opportunity to get in person or to create a certain level of high touch in your communications, because that's what's going to take the relationship or the connection to a new level. Of course, it's hard to do in these challenging times, but I mean, you can find ways to duplicate that, right? It's about creating maybe a one-on-one video, or scheduling a phone call where you can spend some really highly present and dedicated time to give to someone else. So that's all that wrapped up in a nutshell. Steve, thanks for reminding me that I teased that.
So
Hopefully
Megan has an awesome question. She says, any thoughts on how to get the higher ups on board with emojis? And then says how to get them to see them as less unprofessional in communication. And maybe I can take this one.
Please.
So Megan, there's some interesting research that was done that calculated the impact of communication breakdowns within two types of organizations. So the researchers found that with companies who have more than 100,000 employees, they calculated that communication breakdowns cost an average of $65 million a year in lost productivity. For companies that have less than 10,000 employees, they found that the cost per person in communication breakdowns was $1,500 per person per year. So the research is really clear. When we are not on the same page, it creates a massive disconnect. And that massive disconnect leads to breakdowns, mistakes, rework, and the like. So even though emojis might seem to be this like fun, quirky thing that only emerging professionals do, in Ryan's example, they're actually used to help understand the intent behind the message. And if senior executives can understand that 60% of the messages that are two words can be misunderstood, then maybe they'll be more likely to use some kind of an emoji or some kind of a graphic or some kind of an intentional use, so that we're on the same page and we're not having these breakdowns. So just some interesting data, some interesting research. Anything else, Ryan, on how to get them on board with?
Yeah, great point, Steve. Great question, Megan. And when we're in a live setting talking about this topic, and we do a lot of work with mid to senior level leaders, and I always like to ask them the question, I'm saying, raise your hand if you sent an emoji to a coworker this week. And I would say 80% of the time, everyone's hands up in the air. So I used to ask that question 2 to 3 years ago, and it was less than half. So just for my own experience, and Steve and I is talking on this topic, we've seen the trend going up. And what's really fascinating too is how behaviors are rippling up generations like we've never seen before. Sometimes if I was feeling ornery with an audience, I would ask them, hey, how many of you are on Facebook? Most of the room will raise their hand. And then I'll ask them, hey, how many of you told yourself or someone else at some point that you would never join Facebook because it was for the kids? And most of those hands will stay shamefully raised. And it's a good indicator that, we might put these communications on the back burner or discount them thinking they're fads. But in reality, no, this is just kind of the natural progression of where the world's moving. And like never before, we're seeing communications ripple up generations. And so that's not going to help other folks get on board per se, but this hopefully gives you some helpful context. The adoption rate seems to be growing rapidly. So part of the way to get them on board is to wait. The last thing I will say too is share this information. Everyone's going to get a copy of this deck and this video. So share this interesting data too, because I think when we share this with our audiences, I get so many responses via email that have all kinds of emojis in it, or on LinkedIn that have emojis, and they always point to it like, see what I did there? And so I think there's a certain level of like barrier that is lowered after sharing this information in a more business context that gives them permission to start using these tools that are at their disposal.
Love it. So I have one more question for you, Ryan, since we still have a pretty good audience with us. In one of the earlier slides, you had the statistics that 57% of Gen Z wants feedback several times a week, and yet only 50% of leaders or managers or supervisors, whatever that stat was, actually provide that. Why? Why is there such a disconnect between what this emerging generation wants and what most leaders are actually giving them?
Great question. And it's very generational. In fact, if the established generations, typically what's been normal for them is feedback that comes quarterly or twice a year or at the annual review, right? That's been kind of the norm for previous generations. And so for many of the established generations, no news is good news, right? That's their whole kind of mindset. So that's how it was for them. And so they project that onto those that they manage. And more so, that's becoming Generation Z. And so in their mind, they're thinking, hey, if I'm not, bugging you or, in touch with you, no news is good news. I'm good. You're good. We should all be good. But in the mind of the Gen Zer, that is not the case. If I'm not hearing from my managers, my leaders on a consistent basis, I think something's wrong. And I'm likely going to be on LinkedIn looking for a new job by lunch, right? So that's the dynamic. Both ways aren't wrong. They're just different. And we've got to be aware of these differences. And one of the reasons why the emerging generation has this growing appetite for more feedback is because they grew up with it, right? I mean, they grew up being able to post something on the internet and get instant feedback in the forms of likes, retweets, shares, comments, etc. And so it shouldn't surprise us when they step onto our teams, they have this massive appetite for more immediate feedback. And now you have that appetite now coupled with the technology that's able to deliver that immediate feedback. And so it actually creates a massive opportunity for leaders to step into, or organizations to step into, not only to satisfy that appetite for this emerging generation, but real-time feedback. The closer we can match feedback with the behavior, so if a behavior happens, the closer we can provide feedback to that behavior, the more likely of a chance that behavior will change. So if a behavior happens and we don't address it till a quarter later, God forbid half a year, really God forbid if it wasn't a year from now, that behavior is not changing. So a lot of people balk at this idea of like this elevated appetite for feedback, but in reality, it's really helpful and it creates a really fertile opportunity for us to step in and change behaviors by using technology. There's great products out there like our friends at 155.com that have these management and learning, employee engagement and feedback platforms that allow for those immediate feedback and for it to happen digitally. So,
and maybe just one additional piece of clarification. when we think of this need from emerging professionals with regards to feedback, we almost assume it's like positive recognition. They need like the pat on the back. But really, there's two types of feedback. You have the recognition and the reinforcement. Recognition is the attaboy, you did great, congratulations, you hit a home run, whatever. Really, though, this is more about the reinforcement. It's about giving validation that what they're doing is correct or incorrect, and they need to either continue with what they're doing, or they need to make an adjustment. And that is what is more so needed on a regular basis, especially because if you're an emerging professional, you're learning, you're growing, you're doing things potentially for the first time. So getting that validation is really, really important. So I want to just create that clarity, because I think it's a good piece of info as we're diving into this topic.
That's fantastic. And Steve, that's why they pay you the big bucks, and why you should.
That's it, my friend. That's it. Well, I don't see any other questions, partner. So if you want to wrap it up, I think that'd be a good next
Yes,
step.
thanks everyone for your time. Your copies of these slides, you'll get copies of this recording. And sorry that the polling didn't work. I think this is just an older version that we have on this one. So sorry about that, but glad we addressed any of your lingering questions in the chat. So again, thanks for your time and attention. If we can help at all, send us an email and/or find us at synklx.com. Thanks everyone. Hope that was helpful. Have a great day.